On behalf of the three Baldwin brothers, Michael and Ian and Philip, and the Marion Institute, welcome to the Three Brothers Quest, Enna Reittort.
Thank you. Oh, that was very solemn.
Well, let's stop with a solemnity. We're so
Caught
glad
me by surprise.
we're so glad you're back for our a second conversation. Thank you for taking the time.
No, it's a treat for me. So,
Well, for us too. And the Baldwin brothers, Michael and Ian and Philip, were intrigued by our first conversation about what is really your second book, Broody Blue, The Natural Human Mystic. I should say, a handbook of ruthless gentleness. I just love that phrase, ruthless gentleness. And we're really excited to talk with you about what is really your first book, Krivda, the Godtricks Against the Matrix. However, we're hoping to use this conversation with you, Anna, as a bridge between Broody Blue and Krivda. And to wit, the brothers are really curious about how you came to discover over time what you call the human path, or the way of the natural human mystic in your second book, Broody Blue. Can we start there? Can you take us on a journey of how you came to be who and where you are now? And maybe for listeners and viewers who haven't listened to our first conversation, I would encourage them to do that. But remind us where you are in the world right now.
in the world, I live in an ordinary village in northeast Thailand, which is the poorest part of Thailand, but developing. And yeah, so I live amongst, animals and tropical trees, the occasional drought, the occasional, downpour. And it's it's a good place to be fully immersed in nature and at the same time have the the outer and the inner space to cultivate, the natural human mystic or the human path. Once again, I spend most of my time with animals, a little bit of my time with humans who are well, my hubby, my Thai peasant hubby and his family. Um, and very little time with, in the big city with people of my socio-professional kind of background. So, it makes me an outsider, both to what would be mine, the circumstances into which I was born and grew up. And at the same time, I'm forever an outsider to the local people here, even though, my hands are as filthy as theirs, and I walk barefoot, and all this kind of thing. And I have a meditation hut, and I meditate, like they don't, in well, perhaps an approximation of Buddhist style. So yeah, I have lived my whole life at the edges between worlds. So that's the first, determinant of my trajectory.
Mm. Yeah, I heard you once use the word de-academify. You said in an interview that you had to de-academify yourself to come to this path, and I wonder if you could take us back. You're alluding
Well,
to, yeah.
that connects with, the people in India, in Bengal, where I came across this movement. It's not even a community, it's a movement of people who say we have no gods, no religion, and no priests. We cultivate purely the human path, which, we would express in English with a capital letter. And so, uh, these people well, basically initiated me without all the paraphernalia of initiation. There's no gurus with flowing robes and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But I came to them, you know, fully loaded with my academic past. I've never been without studying. And so, I already had a couple of master's degrees and I was possibly on my way to a PhD. And so, I started going to these people as a potential PhD student. But the immersion was such into something that was so totally different and had its own roots in an age-old oral tradition of illiterate people. And increasingly, I felt that, that profound difference in how my thought was structured and theirs was structured. And I realized that a very large part of the wisdom that they held was beyond what, of course, beyond what the academic mind could possibly fathom. Most people who have worked with that particular movement have done it in a very intellectual way. And, and even for those who have been profoundly touched, because they're academic, they have to present it, think it through, articulate it with academic language and consequently with, academic thinking. But, I've never been interested in having an academic position, tenure and professorship and all that kind of stuff. So, once the PhD was done, which was, just writing, thinking through and writing that thesis at the borderline of being an initiate mystic with those people, and at the same time, putting this into some kind of academic form. That journey was, well, a very compelling form of torture, put it that way.
This explains, Enna, why you and I get along so well, because I too am a PhD academician who has, for various reasons we won't go into here, found myself, let's say, on the outskirts of academia. So I'm really intrigued by your story. Your two master's degrees, briefly, what did you pursue? What were those in?
Way back when I got a master's in Slavic studies.
Mm,
That's my other big connection, but perhaps we can leave that out for today.
okay.
I'm working on a huge project on Russia.
Mm,
That's what I'm, preparing now. And that too, I think is a profound undercurrent of what I'm doing.
mm,
And it has to do with the fact that somehow I went to India where I never wanted to go, because actually there are very, very, very deep connections between Russia and India.
mm.
But okay, that's another chapter.
Yeah.
And
So
the other one was in so-called medical anthropology. Not because I was in any way medically qualified, but because I didn't want to go into, theoretical anthropology. This medical anthropology department in a large medical university had a crazy director who had all the right ideas, and that course made me discover all the different, all sorts of different philosophies across time and across geographical space of how non-Western modern cultures understand what we call health, disease, and the good life, and the good death, and things like that. So, that opened up my horizon intellectually in a huge way. And then I needed to write a dissertation for that master's, and that's how I ended up in India, where I'd never wanted to go. And so I got the second master's there, and then there's another one. Oh, I have a master's also in heritage management, heritage preservation and management, like cultural heritage, or
So
like
you have,
UNESCO heritage.
so you have three master's degrees:
Yeah.
Slavic studies, medical anthropology, and heritage. Wow. And then your PhD. Tell us about that for just a moment.
Well, the PhD would have been, let's say, the continuation of the medical anthropology master's, where I went back and I went back and I went back to those people in Bengal, where I just knew there was something absolutely essential for me there. And that's how I really got my immersion into, the grassroots, the poorest kind of grassroots, and the wisdom that exists amongst the very poor rural people who are basically marginal to civilization, even though they are the basis of these societies. It is through their work that all the first accumulation of proto capital happened historically. And being at that major base of all these civilizations that have developed has also somehow earned them the distinct non-privilege of being, despised and thrown into great poverty. But that kind of situation is also what has enabled them, until now, in the global south, enabled them to retain at least a part of their ancient culture. I mean, now all of that is falling apart, thanks to the internet, and everybody in the world now has a smartphone. Um, and it's creating this phenomenal rift between the generations. It's mind-boggling to see this happen in the third world, much faster than it happened in the West. But
Yes.
anyway, that's just,
Yeah. Well, and we should put a pin in that because I maybe, yeah, let's pursue that line of thinking here soon. How long were you in India for, in Bengal? How many years?
overall. Well, it started kind of on and off, and the on and off got more and more time in India and
Hmm.
less and less time in the West, until I finally moved there. So overall, about seven years.
Okay. And when did you leave?
I left completely. I left the West completely at the end of 1999, basically on time for the new millennium.
An auspicious year, yes, 1999. So you left the West, went to India. You were there for quite some years in India.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's when I really, 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 went really deep into that human path.
Okay.
Um, and but that is the period when those same people who took me in as the rich woman who knew that she was poor in terms of wisdom, which is why they took me in, because I was humble enough to recognize that. Within those same years, those same people learned that they were poor. Globalization reached.
Here's the kitty.
Hello, we have a co-author here,
Yeah, that's
and she has to participate in these things. Um, but in those same years, there was this very rapid shift within a matter of 1 year.
mm,
And it shocked my friends too, that suddenly, the god of money was all over the place, and it was modifying life. It was modifying, it was modifying the culture in just unprecedented ways that they could not deal with. And so that they learned that they became poor and consequently guilty. Until then, poverty, well, in the age of Gandhi, not that long before, a few decades before, being poor and, hardworking and virtuous and, all this kind of thing it was good. It was valued. Now, being poor was, literally kind of like a sin.
Mm.
And as if it were their fault, as if they had not been made poor by this, new globalized system that was reaching literally everywhere around the planet.
Mm.
And so, for me, experiencing that happening in these people was, I mean, I had already experienced in Europe, in France and places like Italy, the rather quick loss of the old peasant cultures that was still there just after World War II, and very quickly after that, Marshall Plan, modernization, and all that, it started to fade away. So, I'd already experienced that loss. Later on, as a singer, I specialized in ancient church chant. And I got to a point of desperation because there was no oral tradition. It had been lost. And so whatever church chant was still happening and still happening now, was predicated on modern voice training, which completely modified the relationship of the voice with the acoustic of these phenomenal stone churches. So, okay, these are lots of bits and pieces of the whole history before. So experiencing the way these people from whom I had learnt the basic premises and tenets of a human path of very considerable antiquity, but undefinable. In an oral tradition, you can't say when that oral tradition began, but it has very, 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 very ancient roots. And suddenly seeing it overturned, and to their own astonishment, the more astute amongst them, they said to me, well, in the mainstream, this is the Muslim part of Bengal, in the mainstream, they say that Allah is God, but now it's not Allah who is God. It's money is the first God now.
What an
And
astonishing.
so, it was astounding.
Yeah.
So absolutely pinpointed, but at the same time, they couldn't understand because they didn't understand how money works. They didn't understand, the things that we take for granted in the West. They couldn't understand. They had, a tradition of self-sufficiency, of living, using natural stuff for washing their hair and using herbs and just living, the old natural way with this phenomenal human path wisdom. They didn't need anything else. But suddenly, with TV, adverts, serials, where they saw the goings on of urban people of the middle classes, this was, they didn't have the wherewithal to process this. They couldn't understand it.
Yeah. Can you say more about these people who you're describing?
Okay. So these people, they call themselves Fakir
The Fakir.
in Muslim Bengal.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed with them because they were in a way more austere, but also more, they didn't mix with foreigners like their Hindu counterparts, who'd already, acquired, relative sort of celebrity status in certain, uh, flower power sub segments of the American scene. And the Hindus they they expressed their wisdom in terms that they felt were attuned to what Westerners could deal with. So their discourse was modified. And I very rapidly moved to the Muslim side where they were untainted by, foreign influence. And it was hard. I'm not going to say it was easy, but that's how I learned. It was just, basically by immersion.
Yeah. Is the word fakir, what's the etymological?
It basically, in the Islamic lore, it means poor. And so you can have kings who say, I am a fakir king. Because, okay, I have all the riches of a king, but fundamentally I'm poor in terms of the great spiritual riches of, Allah. So, fakir can mean all sorts of things. There were also those fakir in the old days who would lie on a bed of nails. You know, and I, as I explored the different parts of Bengal where I might find more of the people of this human path, I bumped into other types of fakir who had nothing to do with, with my people. So, but they called them my people, as I say, but they're not my people. They say I belong to them more than they belong to me. But they called themselves fakir because it was a positive spiritual term for people who didn't have a self-denomination apart from saying we are on the human path or we cultivate the human path. But they don't say we're the human pathers or the human pathists.
Right. So no gods, no religion, no priests.
And no priests, because it's up to us intrinsically to forge the way of the complete human with all the subtle dimensions based on the only resource that we have as humans who are poor, which is our human body. And our human body is an absolutely miraculous site where we can learn everything about what it is to be the greater human. In a nutshell, that's what it is. And
Yeah.
it was not at all theoretical. It was very practical.
So is it safe to say that the fakir, even though they are Muslim, they are not practicing Islam? They're practicing the human path. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
but it would be wrapped in Sufi vocabulary,
Ah,
which was completely equivalent to the same concepts in esoteric Hinduism, in Tantra.
okay. So tell us a bit more about the Sufi for people who may not know.
So the Sufi basically were, more than they are now, the esoteric side of Islam. And it's out of the Sufi that you get, the great poetry of people like Rumi and things, and, people like that who are very much admired in the West. And they just cultivated that presence to the ineffable. They, cultivated learning the language of the birds. Um, and they were at certain times persecuted in different parts of the mainstream Islamic world. But the interesting thing is that most of the conversion to Islam outside the Arab world, and especially in Asia, was done by Sufis. The Sufis went wandering. You had the Silk Roads.
Yeah.
The Silk Roads were, okay, they were trade roads, but along trade roads, you had a lot of people who were traveling because they were curious, to go and find out, you heard of this great sage who lives in that city, Mosul or, Derbent or whatever. So you went on your way to, go and meet this great sage and have the privilege of, a conversation with him or her.
Mm.
And so these people traveled and traveled and traveled. And, sooner or later, they ended up in this place, Bengal, which prior to the British colonization was absolutely a land of plenty. And a land a land that was described by chroniclers of the time as a land of plenty and bliss and beautiful women and happiness. Well, the Brits certainly did a good job of modifying that. And so, you had all these Sufis landing in that kind of place. They fell in love with, the tropical generosity of the nature and the lovely people who were, they were also free-thinking people. Basically, the Bengalis, if they were being oppressed anywhere, they just sort of pick up and leave, go elsewhere. So there was something in that sort of Aboriginal culture, let's say, that appealed to all these Sufis. And now, the countryside is dotted with the gravestones of Sufi saints, or unknown Sufis who didn't even leave a name, but who were very much, part of the local culture, as they sort of immersed themselves in the local culture, and they brought all sorts of stuff that they knew from their home culture. After all, the Muslim world back in the day was highly developed, very high culture, high science, high arts, and things like that. So they brought knowledge to these local people, and that's one of the converging elements that contributed to producing this particular, Fakir human path that I landed in.
Okay. All right. This is you're painting a beautiful picture here. I'm reflecting back on another conversation we've had here with a Swiss anthropologist. You may know his work, Jeremy Narby, who's the author of a book called The Cosmic Serpent.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremy told us a remarkable story. When he was in his mid-20s, as a PhD candidate, he went down to the jungles of the Amazon to study the natives. And he realized as a young lad, plopped down into the Amazon, that he knew nothing. And B, that maybe rather than studying the locals, it might be better if he were to work with them. And so he essentially had sort of what I think he would characterize as a dawning epiphany that, indigenous people actually have a lot to share with those of us in the so-called first world, if we were only to, drop into flow with them, let's say. And I'm wondering, Anna, was there a moment when you show up and you're like, all right, here I am in Bengal. Was there a moment where you're like, okay, I'm going to, I guess, follow the human path of the fakir and the natural human mystic? Do you recall like how you came to sort of identify the journey, or was it gradual? I'm so curious about that.
No, it was nearly immediate. My first acquaintance with them was through somebody who was organizing a kind of a study, a period of study and acquaintance with their culture, working as musicians. So I'm a singer, and there was a bunch of other people, singing people, musical people, and so about 10 of us went on this trip, and the songs, the lyrics of the songs that we studied were kind of very approximately translated, because they're esoteric songs and consequently they cannot be translated. But I already sniffed, being a linguist ever since whenever, because I was born multilingual and all that, I just immediately sniffed that, hey, there's way more than, to this than just the music. And so the next opportunity I had within a few months to go back without the music, but going for the, I started there as a student on the musical side, and I went back there and stayed there as a student. I never needed to shred or to shed my my sense of prior superiority, which I never really had. I never really had that sense that, I know more than other people. I'm more this, that, and the other than other people. I've always had the sense that there's so much to learn. There's so much to learn, and am I going to have enough time in this lifetime to do all the learning that I need to do? But then I had to do the unlearning of my Western learning
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
great extent, which actually, Rob, it brings into greater relief what I do credit the West for. The ability to use critical thinking, the ability to abstract yourself from something,
Mm.
but without becoming a prisoner of abstraction, being able to and fro between the mystical, the abstract conceptualization, and then the possibilities that you can establish in terms of right action. They complement each other. The problem with the West and with modernity is that we're trapped up here.
Yes. So beautifully said, and I'm just personally resonating with what you're describing here. I want to get to a few questions from the brothers. Before that, though, you, I think, in both Krivda and Broody Blue, you mention, I think, what is a fairly well-known esoteric phrase: "All that is in the universe is in the human body." All
Mm-hmm.
that's in the universe is in the human body. What does that mean in the context of your journey? Where does that phrase come from?
For me personally, it's this is specifically what esotericists of Indian traditions will say, which Westerners think, once again, slightly wrongly, that they encapsulate with the formula "as above, so below," or "as below, so above." It's the understanding that the microcosm contains everything of the macrocosm and reveals the macrocosm.
Mm-hmm.
So for my Fakir people, well, the microcosm is this body. As I said, it's the only thing that really belongs to a poor person who belongs to, the lowest non-caste of the Indian caste system. And well, actually, in a, you could call it a derivation of Tantra, which is very, which certain branches of Tantra are very body based. Others are much more sort of speculative. But these people say, we don't do Tantra. We don't do mantra. We don't do Tantra. No Tantra mantra. No, 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 no.
Yeah.
So, once again, it comes from, those very ancient origins lost in the mist of time. But basically, these people are, to my knowledge, the most acutely body-based esotericists in the whole world. Apart from those who are, at the satanic end of the spectrum.
Mm. Yeah.
These people are, they start with the body and with the things that inhabit the body, the emotions. And they treat the emotions as something that is as material as, your flesh. Basically, they make a distinction between the gross body and the subtle body, but they say that they're both equally material in terms of being both equally real,
Mm.
which means that they call themselves Bastu Badi, meaning it translates literally as materialist, but it doesn't mean materialist in the stupid Western sense. It means that, we're not only after the visibly material, we are after the subtle matter that inhabits everything that we can't see. And that makes possible all the miraculous things of the human body, which enables us to express all that subtle stuff in what we do, here in this incarnation. So, I mean, it's actually pretty simple once you get it.
Yeah. Yeah. When you put it that way, It does seem to be, and yet we, as you say, we have such trouble with it in the West. So we have the physical body, the subtle body. Where does this concept of mind flow in here, if at all?
Now, mind, that's the other, yeah. I mean, the mon in Bengali or manas in, Sanskrit and Hindi, it's not just the mind up in the head, it's the heart mind.
Mm.
And it's the clear experience of the fact that you don't, well, Westerners are capable of thinking only up here, and most of them are not capable of thinking anywhere else. But for traditional people, basically, I'm seeing the same thing here in Thailand. The thinking happens, it's the heart mind. And it's the heart is not confined in the realm of emotions, contrary to what we do. I mean, okay, now we know in the West that the heart has 40,000 neurons. Consequently, it can think. But the way it thinks is not the same as this fellow up here. Mm-hmm. And so that is the most astonishing esoteric journey, is to fall into that, what I call non-doing, and the Japanese call non-doing, where you can actually experience that mysterious thinking of the heart. And they, for them, well, it comes naturally, but then it has to be cultivated in order to start perceiving the more mysterious layers of reality. And then they'll express these through all sorts of metaphors in their songs. And, okay, they'll compare the body to a scintillating city with all sorts of palaces and bazaars and things. But be careful, my heart mind, not to get lost in all the glitter. The real treasure is not, it's, et cetera, et cetera. Or, the body is compared to a bicycle or to a boat on a river. I mean, they use all sorts of down-to-earth images that have the poetic ability, in the way they combine words. Their poems are untranslatable.
Really?
Well, in terms of conveying the different layers, the exoteric, which is, great for all the people who love their songs, the mainstream people. And then there are the other layers, such that, initiates will put questions and give answers to each other in song form at esoteric layers. And, then you've got the mainstream audience watching this game of ping pong. They don't get the gist of it, but the game of ping pong is fascinating in its own right. There's a particular energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's really a very compelling energy that comes from beyond the intellect, from that kind of other knowing that can only be cultivated.
So the mind is the heart mind that I think we're just beginning to maybe rediscover, perhaps, in the West.
Well, the West is discovering the heart. What I'm finding, in people reacting to my books is there are people who are struggling with the mind and they realize that there's, somewhere else to go. And then you've got the people who claim to be living in the heart, or who really are living, with this business of, love and compassion and all that. But the magic of being a human being is when the two really operate together.
Yeah. The heart
and
mind.
So that's, that's the journey back home for Western people is it's reconnect. It's rediscovering that the heart is more than just the emotions. It's way more than that, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
And then, okay, I'm living with heart-based values and all this kind of thing. Okay, but this thing must not be negated. This is, after all, the prerogative of humans to have this ability to think through things, problems, this, that, and the other, and to use language. But now it's a question of re-inhabiting that thinking mind and that language with real substance. A real substance is, mostly lacking.
Yes. I'm thinking back to Broody Blue and the non-doing of breathe me, if you will, and the heart mind, the physical body, the subtle body, and perhaps it is our breath, it is our spirits. We take the Latin root of breath, spira, spiritus, the breath, that maybe when we become aware of our breathing, let's say, or that we are being breathed, allows us to perhaps integrate and amplify all of those different parts of us.
When the being breathed attitude becomes natural, then there is no difference between the physical and the non-physical. Yeah. You still feel the physical, but you feel it as an integral part of something absolutely gigantic. And it's not even porousness. It's the space of the heart becomes absolutely gigantic. And the rational you sort of suddenly pops in and says, how is it possible for all of that to be held in this tiny little chest of mine? Well, that's the macrocosm in the microcosm.
Wow. It was, it is, it will be.
Oh.
I know, yeah, my head's exploding. Let's just to tease our listeners, our viewers, before we get to the brothers' questions, which we will do here in a moment. In Krivda, I think I've got it on page 342. It's towards the very end of the book. You talk about humans, the cosmos, and this concept of fractals. And you write, every human is a fractal of Earth. And I'm wondering.
Yeah, I'm not the author of that idea. There's a contactee by the name of George Kavasilas who says it in those terms. And since fractal is okay, it's the kind of scientific concept that appeals to people basically in the West. I use it also. Fundamentally not terribly comfortable with all these scientific terms because we're constantly thereby limiting something that is beyond words and that can only be experienced. And once you experience it, well, you're going to use metaphors at best. You're not going to use scientific terms. And otherwise you just, you recognize it in the gaze of another person who has the same kind of experience. So I do prefer the notion that, the whole universe or the human body in its totality, of course, not just the physical, but even so, just the physical, because just the physical is the condensation, so to speak, of the larger being that each one of us is. Then, even if it's just the physical body, it contains the whole universe.
Let's stay with that. All that is in the universe is in the human body. We'll leave it there. Michael Baldwin wanted to ask, how do you compare the path of the the human path of the natural human mystic with something like Buddhism, which of course is a huge and diverse set of practices, I suppose. But do you have any thoughts about that? I've heard you talk a bit about that elsewhere, Buddhism and as it relates or doesn't relate to the human path.
I think, in the time of the Buddha, from the stories that we've been told about him, he was a very straightforward kind of fellow. He didn't go into all sorts of complications, and he just, wanted other people to have this experience of the aha that he had, in which he thereafter dwelt. But then, like so many other people whose extraordinary experience started a tradition, or those, out of whom, or on the basis of whom, or against whom actual religions were started. It's kind of difficult. Yeah, that human path of my Bengali Fakir is precisely not an ism. Since it doesn't have a name, and it has basic rules for how humans conduct themselves on this human path, but they're not dogma. Everything is purely experiential. There is no, in its normal form. I mean, perhaps it will, now that it's basically moribund because of, monetarization, globalization, all of that. There probably will be people now who will come and do exegesis on those essential tenets. And, who knows where it'll go, how far it'll go, and how complicated it'll become, away from, for instance, what Gautama Buddha himself experienced and tried to convey. And, the thing is, when you're trying to convey that kind of experience, you have to use speech with people who don't understand where you're going. So somehow, it's this steering the cognitive process out of its familiar rails to try and get it, throw it off the rails so that it starts, so that it has that shock of opening to the other possibilities that are latent inside. So that is the common, for any true spiritual guide, that is the fundamental thing, is that this person is not going to teach you anything. This person is going to, it's like, like Socrates trying to get people to birth the wisdom that is already inherently inside them. But then Buddhism, especially in the West, has become this very, very intellectual pursuit. All these writings and all this, when I've had, some couple of years involved with Western Buddhism. When I compare it to the, grassroots Buddhism here, that is still partly mixed with, different indigenous, pagan, non-religious rituals and beliefs. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying here. Philip Baldwin, and you just used the word spiritual a moment ago, and it seems to be a word that you don't love, let's say. You suggest the word spirit filled as perhaps a better.
Yeah, spirit-full.
Yeah,
Spirit-full.
Can you talk about?
Well, because
yeah,
it's very simple. It's basically, in the West, once again, we have these constant sort of polarized, dualisms, and we've got, oh, he's such a spiritual person, meaning he's non-materialist. Okay, but there again, the human path of my, Bengali grassroots, they're certainly not going to deny matter. And any poor person who needs to work, to feed themselves and their family, they're not going to deny matter like, we supermarket addicted people can. The people there, I think, if only everybody started growing stuff, at least on their balcony, if they live in a city, it would help a lot. But the culture of consumption is, apart from the culture that puts that stocks everything, all your thinking up here in the mind, are so very, very destructive. Whereas, your hands in the dirt, putting in seeds and manure and what have you, that's spiritual.
Mm.
Picking up the, chicken poo, that's also spiritual.
Yeah.
And conversely, um, the unseen stuff is part and parcel of our materiality, and it cannot experience itself other than through the vector of materialization.
Mm.
So, spirit and matter are there, they go together. I mean, to dissociate them, well, okay, there are spirits out there, and there are happy spirits and there are very unhappy spirits. Thailand has loads of unhappy spirits, and they have a whole catalog of all sorts of unhappy spirits.
Wow.
So, we, with an incarnation, well, we get a chance to work out, the healing for the unhappy spirits that we've inherited from past lives or whatever. And we get a chance to cultivate the happy spirits that inhabit us, whatever those spirits may be, part of our soul. I mean, there again, it's very, very, I think it's completely impossible, by now in human evolution to start categorizing all these things. The interweaving of destinies, of lineages across ethnic groups, across, religious beliefs, across so many different circumstances. We're all a great hodgepodge of all sorts of stuff at the subtle level, which, it manifests in these incarnations that we have, where we're going to be doing at least some of the stuff that the immaterial parts of us need us to do, so that this whole, great game of life can continue producing, whatever it takes to educate the universe.
I knew you'd bring it around, Enna. That's beautiful. Well, so Ian's question, and I think this will be a good question to maybe set up what I hope will be a third conversation soon about Krivda. Ian's wondering and wanted to ask, what do you see gets in the way of humans becoming fully human, following the human path, becoming natural born mystics? I mean, this is obviously a big question. And
Well,
you can see why that leads us directly to Krivda, of course, but
yeah,
maybe tease us a little bit. What keeps humans from following the human path?
the inner dissociation, the, mind control that has been applied to us for millennia,
Mm.
and that we've internalized, and that has been especially well perfected in the West.
Mm.
The West, there's there's the intellectual side of it, the economic side of it, the religious. There are so many different intertwining aspects to it. So, to do it justice would probably require me to sit down and prepare a lecture, which I'm not prepared to do.
Well, well, well. So,
But basically, we are internally fragmented,
mm,
And I mean, I can speak for myself. Was I ever internally fragmented? And I had some substantial help from studying and training in past life regression, going into certain past lives where I started to understand some of the forms of dissociation that had been applied to me and that I overcame or did not overcome in those past lives. And one of them was, I think I've already mentioned this in some other podcast. I was in a recent past life a child in one of those, SRA situations with the rape I was 3 or 4 years old. And I can assure you it was no product of I couldn't possibly have imagined that kind of thing. And when if a past life regression is well done, you go into something that you experience so very, 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 very totally really. It is unquestionably real. And so there was all the torture aspect, the sexual aspect on this small me, who at that age, of course, had nothing that enabled her to process it. It was just raw experience. Which is why, these things are done to very small kids. And then there was this dagger that was put into my heart, and my heart was pulled out, cut into little pieces, and, the different people around this at the heart. So having had that experience, I realized in this life a number of things that had happened to me in childhood in this life. But I also understood now much more clearly how this internal dissociation is produced, and from the very youngest age. And then we perpetuate it because we are literally programmed in that direction. And that's where, the famous, people like Kathy O'Brien and many others who've been coming up, since, they all explain the same process. So it can be done through violent means like that, but it can also be done through soft violence that does not appear to be violent. And that is what, over the past, let's say, over the 20th century, the methods for that were perfected to do the mind programming on whole populations. Understanding also that those whole populations are themselves reincarnations from their own previous past lives, where they've also previously received the violent forms of dissociation, which they carry from life to life, as long as they're not resolved. And, this is why certain really serious meditators find it so important to be able to revisit their past lives, to go and see the points where they've been cut up internally. And once you recognize that you've been fragmented internally in this particular way, well, you address this particular way, you can heal it. There's a number of techniques for that. Or you can heal it just by recognizing that, oh, that happened. I don't need it anymore. I can let go of it. For some people, that is enough. But not knowing that it's there is a fundamental hindrance to recovering, the wholeness of who we truly are.
Yeah. And do you credit the human path, Enna, with helping you heal?
Oh, for sure. For sure, because
I assume so. But yeah, maybe.
I mean, not because I wasn't going there because I felt broken. I went with them because they had a fullness. They had a sort of integral integrity, so to speak, that, it's only later on that I realized that, well, actually, yes, I was fragmented. And, past life regression helped a lot to realize what that fragmentation was. But basically, it was all predicated on the non-dissociability of the material incarnation and the whole subtle being. I
Yeah.
mean, that was foundational for me. And, from then on, I cultivated it, in my own way after I left Bengal. And when you start cultivating it, the tools that you need within the particular culture where you're living are going to come your way.
Hmm.
But it's the initial cultivation, the dwelling in a particular attitude. So I was, dwelling in the attitude of, well, yes, the whole universe is in my body, and even if I didn't fully experience it, but it still was very, very real in, many different small ways, and in my interactions with others who were, going in a similar direction.
Yeah. And again, I'd refer our listeners, our viewers, to our first conversation and your book, Broody Blue, where you lay out the non-practice, as it were, of of this as you've experienced it, and it's a very beautiful and powerful meditation, let's say, on what's possible.
Contemplation.
Contemplation. Thank
Meditation involves, a large element of the mind, actually,
you.
and that is not helpful, for people. And meditation, the first next word that most people say, what meditation technique do you do?
Yes, right, and then we're into the practice. Yeah. So um, maybe for my sake, clarify the difference between meditation and contemplation. Meditation is mind focused. Contemplation is
Just being with what is.
ah,
It's this it to me. Well, contemplation, once there probably isn't a word for, which is why I call it non-doing.
yes,
But the point is, in non-doing, many people think it's a matter, it's just a matter of just being. Yeah, but just being, you're being a contemplative couch potato, basically. The essence of it is this utter presence of being completely present without doing anything. You're not putting your eyes there. You're not concentrating on the tip of your nose. You're not doing a particular mood. You're doing nothing in terms of techniques. You're just not just being with your breath. You're being present, completely present to the fact that something is breathing you. Being completely present. And that is actually the most powerful form of activity. Mere only utter presence. Only that, without doing anything, without an effort of the will.
that two-word phrase, utter presence. Wow.
But it's that, that completely, utter presence, being absolutely present, presence awareness or whatever. That is the key. That's the key to real concentration. That many will cultivate through different other techniques, but it is intrinsic to us. Little kids sitting, watching, a dragonfly. They're completely and utterly present to watching the butterfly. That's it. And so, it is natural to us. But there again, we've been fragmented away from it by all the busyness of life, of modern life. Whereas these grassroots illiterate people, all of a sudden, in the middle of being very busy doing whatever it is, in the fields, they suddenly sit down and nothing. And not because they're particularly cultivating something, they are just going back to that natural state of the resting human. But we can cultivate it by doing it, by non-doing this business of being in this utter presence a little bit every day. It grows on you, and it's effortless, and it creates a completely different source of humble power in one's life. I say humble power because, the word power also has these.
Yes, yes. And I have to say, I have been cultivating this non-practice for many months now since I've really first read Broody Blue. And I shout out to our cats on the back.
Meow.
Yes, because I too have a cat. I've told you about him named Neville, and I've been watching him per your suggestion, and he practices what you describe daily.
Exactly.
For
Who needs
large chunks of the day, just practicing utter presence. And I've been doing it sort of midday, just turning everything off and going outside and just sitting and cultivating that sense of being utterly present without practicing anything. And it is revelatory.
It is, isn't it?
And it happens kind of in small gradual doses, but over time, it is revelatory. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy. I'm so happy that, this thing has touched you, and that you've actually taken up the non-doing,
yes.
and that you're feeling the effect of it.
Yes, it's so, to use a word that we both like, I think it's so subtle at first, but the accumulated subtlety begins to show itself. It's fascinating. Yeah. Well, Enna Reittort, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And, congratulations to you for very, very thoughtful sort of questions. I mean, the fact that you don't, it's not just sort of questions that come to your mind. You've actually read the books, and you even say that you read them more than once. I'm humbled. I'm humbled, Rob. It's thank you so much.
Well, thank you too, Enna, and looking forward to our third conversation.
Take care.
You too. Welcome, everyone, to the Three Brothers Requesting Room. I'm Dr. Rob Williams, the host of Three Brothers Quest, and with us today are the three brothers, Ian, Michael, and Philip Baldwin. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's good to see you all. So, Enna Reittort, our second conversation, really, I'm imagining this as a bridge between our first conversation about her book, Broody Blue, and her next book we'll consider at some point, which is called Krivda, Godtricks versus the Matrix.
Right.
But I don't know about you all, but I learned a lot about Enna's journey that I didn't know. But who'd like to start us off?
Well, I'll kick off. I actually wrote something simply because I'm sort of overwhelmed with stuff to do these days. So I listened to it again 2 weeks ago, and I thought at the end of it, boy, I better write something down because I'm going to forget everything in 2 weeks. So for the heck of it, I wrote, for me, one of the most fascinating revelations of this interview, and by gosh, it was a terrific interview, is the philosophy of Fakir, something until now I had never heard of. It strikes me as extremely compelling, reflecting Enna's conviction that each of us is a mystic, something I believe the Buddha was also saying, that, as he did, waking to enlightenment, resides within each of us. Very simple, which is what makes it so tough. I'm also very fascinated by the need to do nothing but sit in nature daily, and something transformative will happen. With this is her admonishment not to have a practice, not to have a mantra, mudra, visualizations, nor a meditation technique, as that drives everything from the mind heart that she speaks so eloquently about back into the brain. It is so abundantly clear that once a great guru like the Buddha reached an enlightenment awareness, noticeable by all who came in contact, that thereafter immediately schools arose, practices arose, meditation techniques arose to sort of tackle the ways to achieve what he had achieved. Because I guess the act of just sitting quietly, now so increasingly impossible with our galloping monkey minds with agendas, lists, the tsunami of things to do, simply overwhelm. So how to calm down and relax into just sitting. And I suppose back when such momentous events of enlightened awareness came, it came at a time when busyness was out of control too. Thus the various schools, techniques, etc. Not too much of war, hang in. And as marvelous Moody Blues, wherein she describes what happens to the usual frenetic hen in everyday behavior, who is clucking, bobbing about, scratching, pecking, never stopping, then sits on her nest of eggs and slips into what may truly be an altered state, almost immovable until hatch time, 3 weeks hence. And of course, this is related to the peasant indigenous communities Enna has resided in. There is a calmness, I guess, an acceptance, a natural embrace, a connection to the nature of reality where striving to achieve a state of mind does not exist. It is totally natural, in complete harmony with nature. But to outsiders, especially, I guess, Westerners, this is considered sort of pathetic, and help needs to be administered, which is so tragic. That's it. It was a great interview, really, Rob.
I concur. It was a wonderful interview. I think we guided you in some sense in your overall approach, which was to probe who is Enna Reittort, because she's not a big name yet, and to caution, I think, anyway, without going into the caution, originally, I think we envisioned you were going to do a deep dive into Krivda, and we raised a flag of caution because the book is very dense and covers material that, without a good deal of background, at least in the person who's alleging all of that, is going to leave people stumbling in the dark or in a state of perplexity. So I'm just interpolating that one bit and congratulating you on giving us, guiding her to give us a really fascinating introduction, in which, at the end of which in particular, she does give a lot of the nuggets that are in Krivda itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Ian. Thanks, Michael.
Day two for now.
Yes, well, I'm slightly speechless. That was quite a lot to absorb, especially your beginning, Michael. And I agree wholeheartedly. There was I don't know what the right word is, a sort of gentleness to the conversation, Rob, that you engendered that was very satisfying to me personally. It was a conversation more than, it was just very nice. Anyway, if I try to stand back and think of the sort of most salient elements of this conversation, first of all, the whole notion of the fakir is extremely captivating. And it's especially resonates for me because it's the emphasis on the experiential, that the realization of following the human path is an experiential activity. And I barely know what I'm talking about, but in my own life, of course, the work I do is thoroughly experiential. At the same time, it is for someone like myself, it strikes me as a very challenging pathway because you don't need a guru, you don't need a god, you don't need guidance, you don't need rituals. Well, I think there's a reason that after the Buddha, all those people fired up all those rituals. It's because as a species, they're helpful. So to jettison all of that and as you might say, Rob, go with the flow. It's a challenging prospect, but it's also somehow a very heartening one because it's outside of all those things that we're led to believe is the way you do need to go to do these things. Second comment I would make towards the end of her talk as concerns past life regression. And obviously, Enna is a serious believer in reincarnation, and in the conversation, she demonstrates the efficacy of trying to get a grip on your past lives. I found that fascinating, also a little terrifying. Um, I'm an agnostic. I'm entirely open to reincarnation. Although, as I often say, somewhat tongue in cheek, I dread the thought because it might mean going back to school. But, it's definitely the notion of diving into past lives is obviously an interesting idea. I think that's enough from me. Yeah.
That's good.
Well, just to pick up on going back to school, Philip, and what a brilliant insight. I was most struck by Enna's impressive academic pedigree.
Mhm.
I mean, the woman has multiple degrees in multiple disciplines from multiple places. And yet, the word she uses is she had to de-academify
Mhm.
herself. And it reminded me, and maybe you picked up on this in our conversation, of my own experience in the academy, in higher ed. We get so in our heads and so
Mhm.
siloed and so conceptually bound.
Mhm.
And in some ways, this, of course, is the problem. And Michael, you spoke so beautifully, I think, to that, and you're kind of alluding to that. And this notion of just shedding all of those layers of skin, and how challenging that is for us as humans in our universe here, the West. But the other thing that Enna pointed out is like, look, this problem is endemic to all advanced industrial societies, including those in Bengal, India, Thailand, the places she's lived. This is not
Right.
uniquely a Western problem.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that's important to flag here because I've really been kind of
Yeah.
chewing on that since our
Yeah.
conversation.
The speed
Mhm.
at which she says they're being upheavaled
Mhm.
in places like Bengal is stunning. It's happened while she was living there.
Yeah.
And so we do have this. I remember way back being I took a trip around the world and spent a lot of time in India and Southeast Asia, and being overwhelmed when I landed back in New York Harbor on the Jersey side and coming in on a bus and then a subway to see my father. The blaring, the advertising, the constant visual stimuli of things, to do's, to buys, to acquires, pleasures, et cetera, et cetera. It was a real smack in the face. And then, of course, I fell back into that routine of the Western way of life. And now we would call it the globalization, which has been so deeply enhanced since in this century by the little devices we carry.
I thought oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Phil.
No, I was just going to say, in conjunction with what you're saying, this idea that they didn't really know what poverty was. Poverty was a discovery basically brought about by the smartphone, that suddenly, oh, modernity is about money and status, purchasing power, and jeepers, we're poor. And we never knew we were poor. It didn't look that way in the same way, at least to us. I thought that was very disturbing.
Yeah. But very, very, very true, deeply true, again, from that experience of my own travels long, long ago. I think we should let our listeners know that this book of hers is a pretty deep, mind-bending experience into the origins of religion and how religion, organized religion, is a vast control mechanism. And I don't want to get into it too much because I think everyone needs to experience it themselves. And we're waiting for a third interview that will dive into those things. But as Mikey pointed out in his remarks, the ability we carry in us, the ability to sit down and simply watch, be in nature. And some of our finest experiences, speaking for myself, but I'm pretty sure for the rest of us, are that being in that position of non-doing.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well, gentlemen, maybe one last thought. Enna's life journey, and this really was a conversation about her life journey, reminds me very much of so many of our other guests. In particular, for me, Jeremy Narby, who parachuted into the Amazon at age 25 or so to study the natives, and came to the conclusion very quickly that perhaps it would be better simply to sit with them, to work with them, and to learn from them.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what Enna has done.
Right.
And I have to throw in one final remark. She really hooked me at the very end of her interview with Russia and what we don't know about Russia. I'm going to assume it's a peasant Russia that goes back centuries. But it has a promise. The American Edgar Casey prophesied that Russia would bring a spiritual message to humanity. And she seems to, who knows, but she seems to be very deeply into Russia. And I think she must be Russian because she speaks Russian. But whatever she is, I'm looking forward to that. So that's two more interviews.
Yeah.
But down the line.
Yeah, we'll have to gird our loins, as they say, tackle Krivda first.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, let us go forth and gird our loins, and as they say in the Old Testament, I believe, and elsewhere. Any last thoughts about Enna? Well,
Look forward to more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Looking forward to our next conversation. And thanks to you all for being here in the Three Brothers Requesting Room. And as always, thanks to our sponsor, the Marion Institute, and to the three of you for making all of this happen and so enjoying this conversation.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.